Hi, this is Kimberley. This is a synopsis and critique of Chapter 20 of the book My Daddy is a Hero, How Chris Watts Went from Family Man to Family Killer by Lena Derhally. The title of this chapter is A Failed Psychopath. Jesus, Mary, and Joseph. Alright, I've lost like 20% of you right off the bat. But damn, not only has Miss Lena been beating my ass, but a bunch of people in the comments were coming after me too. Stop telling me what to do. You're not the boss of me. Like, I thought this was my damn channel. It's fine, it's to be expected. I'll just take it all with a lump of sugar. Or make it Splenda actually, 'cause I keep getting my ass beat about my weight too. Fuck's sake, I can't put a video out without someone insulting me. It's my damn channel. I reckon it's better than no one coming here at all. Come on in, have a seat. I'll just block you if you're an asshole. That's what I like to do when I'm needing to take my power back. Oh, never mind. I'm here to review and criticize a book, so let's get on with it, shall we? The chapter begins with Miss Lena stating, quote, "My theory is that Chris was probably born with empathy deficits. You think? He could potentially be both a psychopath and a communal narcissist. He certainly has traits of both. What I believe made him violent and sent him over the edge was a perfect storm of psychopathic and narcissistic traits combined with relational stress, outside influences, and the propensity that the human brain has towards violence, something we will explore shortly. I've not seen any signs of him previously being violent, or was it just hidden well? A lot of people that were interviewed by CBI and FBI said he was just quiet and meek and nicest guy you'll ever know and all that bullshit. Miss Lena says Pinhead showed many characteristics of psychopathy, although most were not outwardly shown until his 30s. You mean like when he had an unrestrained, crazy affair, ignored the family dog that was left in his care while his family was out of town, how he totally flipped on his wife from the man and husband she was used to torturing the shit out of her both mentally and with giving her an overdose of narcotics, and then eventually killing his loving wife and children. Yes, that. I'd have to agree that it seems like he became a flipping psycho madman in his 30s. Miss Lena says we, the average person, tend to think of psychopathy and sociopathy, narcissism, in a very simplistic way. For instance, Ted Bundy as a psychopath, and that all psychopaths are violent in the same way he is. Also, we tend to think of killing small animals as a child, someone that is psychopathic. I know I've wondered about this myself with CW as a child. I've seen it spoken about when people speculate. People often bring it up. Miss Lena says that while it's true for some, and that they can later veer off into antisocial personality disorder, not all psychopathic people are violent. Well, damn, that's what I was just wondering aloud about CW. They are just out there hiding among us, and no one around them is the wiser. Awesome. They are said to be called community psychopaths. It's my opinion that these people do give off a weird vibe, though, that you just can't put your finger on it, but you know it's there. But wait, CW did become violent in the end. I wonder what Miss Lena thinks of all the pictures of Chris and shit behind his wife or daughters with his hands on their shoulders or neck, and he seems to be daydreaming. I think he fantasized about this for a long while before doing it. You know, I was talking to my daughter about this case a couple of weeks back, and I said something about, I just somehow get the feeling that when he would be out at these oil sites alone and he would open up the thief hatch and just look in it and think weird thoughts to himself, and I just think he was fantasizing about this for a while, like much longer than people probably would like to think. And I just say that too because there's several pictures I've seen, and it's included all three of them, Shanann, Bella, and Cece, where he is standing behind them and he has his hands on their shoulders or near their neck. And I think he would just, when he felt that weird emotion that might have been anger, that he didn't know what it was, that maybe that's what would get him through, is fantasizing about crazy, awful shit. Miss Lena spoke to an expert on criminal behavior that called CW a failed psychopath. See, he can't do any damn thing right. He doesn't even know how to be a raving lunatic correctly. Kim Gorgans is a clinical professor in the Graduate School of Professional Psychology at the University of Denver. She says, quote, Chris Watts is a failed psychopath, like many others in prison for the same kind of crimes, end quote. This means, in short, says Miss Lena, that he couldn't use his sociopathy to his advantage. What all psychopaths have in common, whether they are violent or not, is a lack of typical human emotion and empathy. Well, then, he's not a human, right? Isn't that called a robot? I've been accused of being a robot, or rather talking like a robot. But see if this makes sense to you. CW is actually a robot and was poorly programmed by Cindy, and wires got all crisscrossed and shit in an experiment in artificial stupidity, which led Pinhead to start having the idea that he was human, especially when he met Slutty Barbie, Nikolai, and things went horribly wrong from there in a battle of the witless. But most study is done on these failed psychopaths that are incarcerated, not the ones walking amongst us waiting to blow. She didn't say that last part. That was me. It's a fear of mine. Maybe they could include the question of how many psychopaths live at your residence on the next census, and then require they fill out forms similar to our income tax forms, quick and easy, like those. And then they can study the people that aren't incarcerated. They can call it a psycho-verify audit. Are there any insane asylums left that we could ship some of these off to? Miss Lena mentions an article she saw called I Am a Psychopath by someone named Athena Walker. I'm thinking her and Pinhead can be pen pals. I'm assuming she's one of those run-of-the-mill psychopaths that are walking around at Walmart and work at Anadarko and is sometimes the mechanic that works on your car. This Athena woman describes knowing that you are different in childhood. The world operates on emotion that they lack. They don't have the emotions and feelings that make human interaction easier. I think people should be required to tell us their emotional damage right up front. Then you don't waste your time like Shanann did with trying to communicate with them as though they are your standard human beings. This psycho lady named Athena says, quote, we lack empathy. We lack fear, sadness, anxiety, remorse. We lack many of the things that explain to you in silent code how to behave around others of your kind and the world in general, end quote. My question is, how do you know you lack these emotions? If you don't feel them as you said, how do you know what to describe as different about you and your emotions? For example, my daughter and I have discussed this at length many times. Take the color blue, for example. Someone points at it, and yes, we all agree that this is the color blue. But how do we know that what I see as the color blue is the same color blue that you see? We don't. All we know is that we agree it's blue. Same for a chair. We all say, yes, it's a chair. It's a blue chair. But what if we are seeing and hearing different things? Yeah, we weren't even high when we discussed this. But this lady that wrote the article says that as they age, they, the psychopaths, develop a mask so they can seem like everyone else. And the scary part is the mask they wear reflects nothing of their true self. It's a different person altogether. And those around them are none the wiser and would scoff at the idea of them being psychopathic. She describes herself growing up much like Chris Watts, not belonging to groups, things that others find stressful, such as a wildly dysfunctional family, just doesn't faze them or impact them at all. She says, quote, "This alarmed my parents enough that they assumed I was dangerously suppressing things," end quote. Well, Chris Watts was, and he's a psychopath. I wish his parents had been alarmed. Miss Lena says after reading this article that, gosh darn it all, it sounded alarmingly like Chris Watts. He was a failed psychopath. Quote, "It is his complete lack of empathy, remorse, and normal human emotion that made him capable of murdering his entire family," end quote. Shanann seemed to be completely unaware that she was married to a stark, raving mad lunatic. His mask had been perfected to fit in such a way that it had been concealing his real identity his entire lifetime, and then it slipped, and he became a failure at who he was. How do you fuck up being a psychopath? Psychopathic, a loser, a disappointment, dud, a bust, has been, underachiever, a lemon, an unsuccessful person, lame duck, turkey screw-up, dolt, fuckwit, clinker, fizzle, bomb, disaster, good for nothing, no account, goof off, dilapidated. You get the idea. But he had no idea, not only about being a psychopath, but a failure. He was always detached when negative issues would arise, such as when Papa Ronnie was snuggling up to Snow White and his desire to be a crackhead. But C.W. was aloof and indifferent about it. Even though he talked to Papa Ronnie about it, he was just doing as he thought was expected of him. As a teen, Chris and shit stayed home on the weekends with his empty head and no emotions, and stayed out of trouble. The author says she was aware that many are of the opinion that C.W. perhaps has Asperger's syndrome, which is high functioning on the autism spectrum. These people too are socially awkward, miss social cues, and show very little emotion. They also have a single subject focal point at times. They don't like change and repeat things. Miss Lena says it is quite possible he has Asperger's, but if he does, it overlaps with psychopathy. You know who it sounded like was being described to me was Sheldon from Big Bang Theory. If you guys ever watched that, God, I love Sheldon, but many of these symptoms are of psychopathy as well. She says Pinhead to her leans more towards a psychopath narcissistic type. She says they are rarely violent. She says sure he could have had Asperger's, but she tends to think no, it was more leaning towards psychopathic/narcissist. I'm pretty sure Chris and shit turned out to be violent at the conclusion of the lives of his loving family. Miss Lena mentions a WebMD article where psychologists and psychiatrists agree that people with autism or Asperger's are not likely to commit violent crimes any more than the public at large. Psychopaths don't tend to commit suicide after their crime, as they want to be able to enjoy the reason they decided to do it. They want to sit back and watch the show afterwards, such as Longhead did, thinking he was going to continue his wild, endless summer and live as happily ever after with Nikolai. But he doesn't experience happiness, does he? This no emotion thing, I just can't wrap my head around it. How do you know you want something if you have a lack of emotions and shit? But he did know that he wanted to carry on his life with Nikolai without Shanann telling him he wasn't allowed to play with Nikki anymore, and I guess taking care of his children was going to interrupt his carefree life with Nikolai as well. Another reason Miss Lena is against agreeing with those that feel that CW has Asperger's is a lot of those with this disorder show a lot of remorse, compassion, and empathy. Psychopaths do not. It makes so much more sense to me now that he's a psychopath, that is. It's interesting to watch him in the personal videos, knowing this now, the ones that Shanann shared on Facebook. By the way, her Facebook has been restored. It's back to being public, and it seems just as it was before. I didn't peruse it very much, but it seems to be just like it was, with a lot of her personal posts have been removed, and it's a lot of Thrive stuff, but not all of the personal stuff has been removed. But I would do the same. Some things should be just for family only, and her family has been more than generous in sharing her Facebook and her private videos to the extent that they do. In continuing to compare Asperger's and psychopaths, psychopaths, of course, have no remorse. Think to the front porch interview that Nimrod did. Psychopaths' tendency is to blame and manipulate others and exploit situations and people. The author says, to reiterate this, quote, Chris has now blatantly stated he felt no remorse for his family after he killed them. He certainly blamed others, starting with Shanann when he falsely accused her of killing the children. He has also manipulated and exploited people. These things are in line with psychopathic traits, more so than with Asperger's, end quote. She explains that Fuckface was able to conceal his lack of emotions as being a laid-back person. He was cool, man. He was able to fool people into thinking he was considerate and empathetic, supportive, thoughtful, and caring. You know what? If it seems too good to be true, it probably is. If it looks like a duck and waddles like a duck and quacks like a duck, it's probably a goddamn duck, right? People close to Lunkhead did seem to realize and say that he never showed emotion, but they would say, well, that's just how he is. They thought it was just his style. Now looking back, they see it as ominous. The author seems to surmise this is why C.W.'s mother and sister would constantly badger him about how he felt. They didn't know he was a walking time bomb. But I know I find this to be maddening when you can't tell how someone is feeling. He was doing that shit to Shanann at the end, and he wouldn't tell her what was rolling around inside of his peanut head. My thought is, since he was so cooperative and willing to help and shit all the time, she probably figured he was just fine, that he might even seem to be happy and content to her, until he wasn't, because he had morphed into Cricky, and no one understands Cricky except for Chris and Nikolai. As an adult, people figured he was just socially awkward. I think he may have even come across to some people as shy. Someone that met him at a Thrive conference and lifestyle getaway said Shanann was all bubbly and outgoing and he was, quote, empty with no expressions, end quote. I know that look that they're talking about. And it did strike this person as odd. I'm sure it was like a cheap hotel flashing neon sign. And now they know that his little red choo-choo has done jumped the track. As typical of psychopaths, he learned how to mimic what we humans call love and emotion. Miss Lena says that C.W. often mimicked Shanann, like using multiple exclamation points in his text to her, and that he also did that on social media. But I'm pretty sure that Shanann did his Facebook for him, at least for the Thrive stuff. I know she did. About the other stuff, who knows? But remember, Jeremy said that it came across as all weird and stuff. But Shithead wrote the same way in his messages of love to Nikolai, the same way to Shanann about the ultrasound picture of Nico. Miss Lena says, if you only knew Chris based on his writing style, you would conclude that he was all enthusiastic, cheerful, sentimental, emotional and shit. Then you would meet him in person and a dead doorknob would show up and his receiver would be off the hook and you'd be like, what the fuck? This doesn't correlate. Miss Lena thinks the reason Pissface was nervous around his own wife is because he was acting the whole time. It must have been exhausting to study her and then mimic her. I mean, like, did he pretend to like foods and certain clothing in movies? This just baffles me. It's weird. As I said earlier, I don't really get the whole no emotion thing. And it's not Shanann's fault that he was copying her and mimicking her. She probably just thought they were compatible. But since he had no emotions of his own, he had to copy Shanann. So his emotions, I guess if I can kind of make sense of it, would be like think of him as being a piece of furniture, like an armoire. It kind of makes sense, like a barren, vacant armoire it's just bare and empty and has nondescript style. Just sits over there in the corner, nobody using it, except you can set your drink on it and leave those, little white rings, 'cause it doesn't matter. He doesn't matter. But he couldn't be himself around Shanann because he was mimicking her personality. I think he also mimicked Nikolai's personality, like when he started saying like all the time. It's no one's fault other than his own if he chose to copy them, and he had to think really hard what to say to Shanann because he was trying to figure out what her response would be. And to me, if he thought she was being bossy, it was because he always deferred to her. I don't think she even knew he was doing that he was deferring to her. How could she? He had no emotion and he was just copying her. So she thought he was just as super duper excited as she was. Candy cane Thrive bars are the best. He chose to mimic her. Yeah, these are super good and I super love them and I'm just super duper excited about it. Let's do a live. Shanann assumed he was doing what he wanted to do, right? And isn't it great that they all like the same things at all the same times and we are just so compatible? And I'm super duper excited. If you are mimicking me, then it stands to reason that I'm under the impression that the other person likes and dislikes everything I do. Therefore, we're a perfect match. Miss Lena doesn't say this, but I'm mimicking her and doing one of those surmising things. How the fuck was Shanann supposed to know if he was copying her? She just thought they were super compatible. Miss Lena points out that in using song lyrics to woo Nikolai, that in itself is also a form of mimicking. He was confused about what he was supposed to feel as a father when he said in this Wisconsin interview / confession / horseshit thing, quote, "No father would ever do anything to hurt his blood and flesh, and I did that. And I just don't understand how it happened. I've even read books that said no dad would ever do anything to hurt his children. So I always think to myself, was I even a dad at one point? I don't know," end quote. Some people just need a high five in the face with a goddamn chair. Well, Pissface, had you stayed home on that Saturday night when Shanann was in Arizona and read that book that arrived the day before that she sent to you, the one Shanann got you called Hold Me Tight, you may have discovered ways to mimic being a loving and respectful husband, a man that cherishes his marriage, one who doesn't cheat on his wife. Who were you mimicking when you decided to have an affair? Then Miss Lena clears up a shit ton of my confusion about the no emotion stuff. She said that of course Pinhead had some feelings and that he wasn't totally void of emotion, that he felt rage, anger, and sexual desire. He was very confused about his emotions and didn't understand them at all. Quote, "This is common when children don't learn how to identify and label feelings in childhood, or when bigger personalities take up space in the home. The child learns that their emotions are not important ones and should be suppressed," end quote. Bigger personalities. I will just say it out loud for everyone. His sister Jamie and his mother Cindy. There, I said it. Boys are often brought up in an environment that gives them the impression that it's only acceptable for males to have feelings of anger and sexual desire. Since C.W. had empathy deficits and was unable to understand emotions, it eventually landed in the position of not knowing what love was. He was Googling stuff about love a couple of weeks after Cricky Gold medaled in sexual Olympic gymnastics. It's my opinion he was mistaking lust for love. It's common for inexperienced and immature boys to do that, especially after they've had what they deem as good sex, Miss Lena said it's clear that he did not experience love for other people, but he knew very well how to copy others that were being loving. She quotes an article from Neuroscience News saying that psychopaths do appreciate their relationships in their own special way. They do suffer pain, feel loneliness, have desires, and feel sadness if they don't receive affection. So, they do have desires. That clears up my ponderings about if they know they like a certain food or style of dress. Damn, he almost sounds human sometimes. She said she would explain why Pinhead's relationship worked for as long as he did and why he believes he loves his family. So yeah, all this stuff leads to him being a psychopath. I'm quite enjoying this chapter. However, it's very long and involved, although not as much as the 2 preceding chapters. I'm still hungover from that shit. But yeah, my ass has been beaten by the last third of this book because I had to run my mouth about it being another rehash of Discovery. Too bad I can't count jumping to conclusions and running my mouth as exercise. Miss Lena continues on, telling of what Chris said in the Wisconsin interview about not feeling emotions the same as other people. How does he know this? He said he didn't want to think he is a cold-hearted person, but he just doesn't show emotions and process things the same as others. He said he doesn't want to see the front porch interview. He seemed offended that people said he looked like he had no soul. So, I take it he's in denial about who he really is. But his attorneys told Pinhead he needed to show more emotion. Is that what his leg bumping up and down really fast was? Was he trying to conjure up something? At this point, I jumped ahead in the book to see how much of the chapter I had left. I went on and on and on. What the fuck, Miss Lena? Why can't it be broken down into more manageable bits? But I understand she probably felt like she was writing another thesis. She's written many of those. He doesn't want to think of himself as a cold-hearted person, but he is. Don't we always say, just be you, just be yourself? Just be that empty shelf that you are. Your tank is empty. You're a blank sheet of paper, and an empty nest, an empty promise, an empty threat, an empty stomach, an empty bladder, douchewad, psycho-ho, two-buck, gutter-fuck, dog-balls, twat-hooks, beady-eyed weasel, shit-breath, crowd-unpleaser, Mr. Jizz-bucket, piss-face, big-fat, lazy, flaming asshole, fuck-face and shit-for-brains, dipstick, brain-dribbling muppet, malignant, window-lick, evil-murdering monster, tomfuckery, cheating killer, bastard son of a biscuit-eater, ass-clown, shit-stain, wank-stain, yellow-belly, piss-stain, snot-face, cabbage-eater, coward, crack-whore, deadhead, turd-ball, swine, pencil-dick, monster-moron, bonehead, dirthead, nitwit, Neanderthal, Mr. Anger, reject, shyster, twerp, zit-face, scumbag, nerd, jackwagon, douche-nozzle, fool, freak, fugly, goose, gorilla, doofus, clunkhead, disgusting bad seed, scumbag. I hope you fall down with your hands in your pocket. I hope every time you're watching Netflix and it asks you if you're still watching that you can't find the remote. Metaphorically, of course, I know you can't watch Netflix. Haha. But people like CW that are psychopathic lack the silent code of how to behave around others, around you and the world in general, so I guess CW didn't know that he shouldn't murder his family. Instead of looking up love bullshit on the internet, how about how to tell your wife you've met someone else and you want to split? I'm sure Shanann would have been relieved to no longer have to pretend with her in-laws. She could see that you were on your own path anyway. Unfortunately, there's a psycho in front of it. Miss Lena says that perhaps Chris and Shit felt like he could get away with murdering his family because he has deficits in assessing threat and risk. Pinhead is the kind of person, being, that does not experience panic when, for example, one of the daughters would go momentarily missing in a store or something. He would just calmly walk about looking for the missing child. My youngest daughter decided to hide in a round rack of clothing at Kmart when she was about 4 or 5 years old. All my blood rushed to my face and made it hot. Then all the blood drained from my face and I nearly passed out. My mind raced so fast from how will I tell my husband who is out of town on business, and would I go to jail? How would I be able to go on living? Things like that. After about 10 minutes, she reappeared. I nearly wet my pants from relief when I saw her. She reminded me of this the other day, and all those emotions came flooding back. Pissface acts as though he dropped a pencil on the floor and it rolled under the table. However, he did experience fear and panic. Think when they all went as a group to neighbor Nate's house to watch the security footage. Talk about wanting to wet your pants because you lose it. He could not be still. He was rocking back and forth and squirming all around. He put his hands on his head for Officer Coonrod to go ahead and cuff him. According to Forensic Magazine and a Dutch university study, it is possible to be psychopathic and still experience fear. One of the most obvious signs, says Miss Lena, was that he could drive 45 minutes with his young daughters in the back seat, with their feet dangling over their dead mother, if we are to believe this version of what he told authorities, and then subjecting them to unimaginable fear as he killed them with his bare hands, having Bella watch as he killed her younger sister and best friend, and then dropping her into an oil tank. I hope this shit is not true. I can't bear to think about that. The horribleness he told about Bella and Cece's deaths. He has to be psychopathic to do this. A normal human being. Never mind. He's just an evil monster. Make sure to call him that over and over and over. He hates that. And he hates people thinking bad of him. The author says another clue of his fuck-up, deranged mental state is when he was in school, making up a story of going to China over the summer. I wish he had gone to North Korea and pulled a propaganda poster off the wall in front of a security camera. But fuckface had convinced his teacher that it was true that he went to China. A little side note here, you may hear my grandchildren in the background a little bit, so instead of an interruption, please think of it as joyful noise. But he was delighted that he had fooled her, but he's the fool. Miss Lena says, quote, a person with psychopathic and narcissistic traits is charming and deceptive. They can lie very easily and take delight in it, end quote. She also says he thinks quite highly of himself and his intellectual capabilities. I almost choked on my coffee when I read that. Intellectual capabilities. Yeah, he scored supposedly 140 on an IQ test, so he's book smart. Big deal. He's still a flippin' dumbass. Genius and insanity always go hand in hand. She then discusses the part where CW looked up the lyrics to Battery, the song by Metallica. He says Nikolai asked him to, but even if she did, remember he was looking up love and writing song lyrics in the cards and love notes, so. But the song is about aggression, lunacy, power, and violence. He was getting off on this, feeling euphoric and powerful. I'm so glad he is locked up forever. She said he was feeling a euphoric rush in connection to the song regarding, quote, hungry violence seeker, feeding off the weaker, end quote. She says this would be very indicative of someone with psychopathic traits. Agreed. Then uses the example of David Berkowitz singing to himself all the way home after the first time he killed someone. You know, I cannot relate to this crazy shit, thank God. Recall how he just went on as normal after killing his family, calling the school, chatting with the realtor, sending Nikolai a picture of the wildflowers, no remorse, etc. Krasinski would say he wasn't thinking, that he was in shock and couldn't logically explain his behavior at that time. There is no logical reason. No way in hell could anyone logically explain the stupid as hell shit he did. She says he feels remorse now because his sorry ass is in prison until he takes his last breath. He's trying to sound all normal and shit, lamenting in the Wisconsin interview that had he not been so selfish and caught up in his own needs and desires, that he would still have the great life he had always had. Gag me. The author says had he gotten away with it, he most likely would have lived his life guilt-free. I cannot relate to this shit. I have to tell on myself for the slightest thing, because I can't stand the feeling of guilt and deception. She said any of the tears, remorse, shame, etc. that he managed to conjure up are most likely from self-pity. So, in addition to being an apparent psychopath, the author says he also shows sign of being a communal narcissist. We had discussed that a couple of chapters back when we did the condensed advanced level college course on narcissism. He showed signs of being a communal narcissist because he just blossomed when he could do things for other people. He liked being a helpful boy that does good deeds. He relished being the martyr. He appeared, says Miss Lena, to secretly harbor feelings of grandiosity around his helpfulness. He cares a great deal what people think of him, excessively. He wants people to think that he's still good. The reasons he would do all he did was for himself in a selfish way, not because he is good. He is extremely delusional. He has a deep need of approval from others, like the way he got so happy when they told him that Shanann's family still loves him. They are more generous than I. Miss Lena warns us that people like Chris Watts are very dangerous, seeming to be so nice and kind, always thought of as a good person, as everyone said in their interviews placed in Discovery. She says people think that a person like him must have snapped, and it is a one-time event, that he made a mistake. He was possessed by an evil spirit. No to all of that shit. Get that shit out of your minds. Miss Lena says by looking at him as still a good person diminishes the lives that he took, the people he brutally murdered, and the craziness of his actions and the way he disposed of their precious bodies. He did this shit in cold blood. He doesn't even have the excuse of being drunk or on drugs. Miss Lena says he wasn't even mentally ill with psychosis. But is this not mental illness? I looked it up and it's a personality disorder. Quote, a personality disorder is a type of mental disorder in which you have a rigid and unhealthy pattern of thinking, functioning, and behaving, end quote. She says, quote, remember that the psychopathic and narcissistic people are incredibly charming and know how to appeal to people. Just because someone cares what others think about them does not necessarily make them humble, empathetic, or a good person, end quote. So, beware. Don't be snowed by their bullshit. It's very, very easy to be taken in by these crazy assholes. Y'all, take a look at everyone in your life. Do you have a psychopathic communal narcissist walking among you? Learn from Miss Lena, please. Pinhead exhibits detachment from reality about the magnitude of his crimes. Yes, he does, doesn't he? And the whole petition thing that tried to get his family photos down, he couldn't understand why anyone would want to hurt him. It, quote, blew his mind, end quote. See, I've been telling y'all all along that he is a fucking fucktard. This proves it. And he says if ever he gets released, he's going to go straight to a ministry and start going to jails and prisons and help inmates. Damn, he's delusional. He thinks, first of all, that he can get released for good behavior. See, he's still a good boy, just as Mommy taught him. He should be released so he can go on to serve God and everyone else. I think he truly believes he is beneficial to mankind. He believes his own fucking bullshit. Astounding. Fucking delusional fucktard. Steve Wren, the Deputy District Attorney for Weld County, said, quote, police officers, first responders, prosecutors, defense attorneys. We operate in a world where we see bad people do bad things on a somewhat daily basis. This took it to a level that I don't think a lot of people are still able to get their heads around. It's impacted the way we go about our daily lives and how we interact with our families, how we are able to do our jobs sometimes. End quote. The ripple of one crime like this has been phenomenal. The first responders that had to remove the children from the oil tanks, they will never be the same. Yes, like Dave Baumhover. Quote, Chris agreed to have Cadell write the book if it was the story of his path to redemption and his journey to finding God in prison. He chose Cadell probably in part because he wanted to control the narrative. She's a religious woman and not a journalist, so he might have felt she would paint him in a more favorable light, end quote. Yeah, well, She wouldn't have to mention she's a Christian if she just acted like one. And I'm not one to judge based on being a religious woman. I base it on whether or not they're an asshole. CW tried passing off that he was possessed by something evil. Yes, he is. Himself. He was possessed by himself and he is evil. But he wants us to know he was only possessed for a short time. He's all good now. Miss Lena says he thinks of himself as sort of a celebrity. Think for a moment, asshole. What kind of evil shit made you, quote, famous? Well, it's a crying shame, but he really does have fans. I guess they're entitled to their faulty thinking. They're probably a few bricks shy of a load themselves. His delusions of becoming a martyr and helping people are even more fully realized for him now that he is internationally known. I wish he had taken the advice he was given by other inmates to drown himself in his toilet, but instead he memorizes Bible scripture and tries to figure out his purpose in life and how he can help others come to know God and the Bible as he does. Where is his fucking off button? Fuckface has some traits on the communal narcissist checklist, such as, I will be well known for the good deeds I have done, and I have a very positive influence on others. Also, I greatly enrich others' lives. And let's add, I will be famous for increasing people's well-being. And last but not least, I'll make the world a much better place. Thank you, Fuckface Watts. You're awesome. Yeah, keep going. He wants to know the world that he is now a man of God, a servant of God, and should be forgiven for his transgressions. Miss Lena says he feels like this is the way to absolve himself of blame and guilt for what he did. Keep trying, asshole. She says it's impossible to know definitely what is going on inside of that peanut head, but knowledge is power and will help you spot red flags. So please take what Miss Lena says seriously and to heart. She also says that Shanann and CW's relationship followed the path that all abusive narcissist relationships do, but that theirs was unique. From what is evidenced in the discovery and all that was made public, and I'm guessing public Facebook videos and such, but relationship, if there was any abuse coming from Chris, it must have been so subtle that it was unnoticeable, says Miss Lena. Shanann said in her text that it came out of nowhere, and she was at a loss and baffled at how he was acting. She didn't know who he was anymore. And I would also like to add that in the 6 weeks leading up to the murders, he was clearly abusive to her, but it was kind of hidden, so even her parents had no clue. Quote, as stated earlier, when he first met Shanann, she was at rock bottom in her life because of circumstances around her health and her divorce. In the Facebook video earlier mentioned in this book, she describes her attempts to push Fuckface away from her as he unremittingly pursued her. Chris stuck around until he won her over. Narcissists and psychopathic types prey on weaker people because they need to feel a sense of control and power. Chris made himself valuable in the way only he knew how, by making himself helpful and special, by differentiating himself from the stereotypical guy, end quote. He made Shanann feel special, and she constantly praised him, so that fed his narcissistic ego. Sandy told Shanann that Chris was sent to her from God. God Almighty, son. Don't tell him shit like that. Did Shanann tell him what Sandy said? I'm sure that just inflated his fucking ego over the top. No wonder he got such a swole peanut head and became such a pathetic attention-seeking bag of wind, wise guy whore. Quote, it would have been almost impossible to predict that Chris would have turned out to be the murderer he became, but after 8 years the devalue phase emerged. At this point, the narcissist person has already won you over, and they start to become cruel and abusive, mentally, emotionally, physically, sexually, or all four, end quote. Quote, even though Shanann knows something was different and didn't feel right, Chris was making her think everything was fine. This was frustrating for Shanann because she knew something was wrong, but she wasn't sure what. Chris was making her feel like she was crazy, gaslighting her, end quote. He was doing a form of psychological abuse on her, making her doubt herself and her sanity. Quote, it's incredibly confusing to see a person who once put you on a pedestal suddenly act so cruel, cold, and unfeeling towards you. There is an element of disbelief because you feel like the old person, the one that was so kind, sweet, adoring, and giving, is still there. The sad part is the real person is the cruel one, with no empathy for you or your feelings. Chris duped Shanann by giving her false hope imminently before he murdered her. She was feeling quite optimistic before she left for her final trip to Arizona by the sound of her text to Chris, which is reprinted in its entirety. She said, "Good morning, honey. We are checked in and everything. Enjoy the girls. I told Bella I was leaving for work with Nikki and assured her I was always coming home. Give them lots of kisses for me. I miss and love you so much. Love you, baby. Send me pics," end quote. But he was all done with her. He was wiping his hands of her and the children because he no longer had a use for them. They no longer provided his supply. He found a new source, Nikolai. Quote, his old life no longer served a purpose for him. In fact, his life of the last 8 years had become an obstruction to getting what he wanted. This is also where the blame and rage towards Shanann came into the picture. Shanann, and by extension the children, became the reason he couldn't get what he wanted. Thus, he reasoned that the only way to get what he wanted was to just annihilate the old life, literally. Discard is the most accurate word for what Chris did for his family, end quote. My God, this chapter is never going to end. Quote, Chris confessed to Cadel that he had zero remorse after hiding the bodies of his family. It's impossible for a normal person to fathom their own children having the same value as garbage. This is why it's so important to understand the profile of a person with psychopathic and severe narcissistic traits. They are very dangerous. When Chris describes his role as a father, he says, quote, all I wanted all my life was to be a dad and have kids that love me, end quote. Take notice that he specifically said he wanted to be a dad so he could have kids who would love him, as opposed to having children he could love. This is because he may or may not have the capacity to truly love anyone, although he certainly felt a need to have other people love him. Sadly, the attachment to his children seemed to be a narcissistic one. It was all about what they were giving him: love, attention, giving him purpose, or just making him look good. This is sad. They were just pure love for both of their parents. Your parents are the first love of your life, but that wasn't enough. Nikolai wasn't going to be enough soon. I'm willing to bet that part of the fun of their relationship was the sneaking around, the thrill of being discovered. Quote, it's interesting to hear Chris talk about his memories of Shanann. It's like she was an object to him, perhaps, or even a trophy. In Cadel's book, he speaks about her captivating beauty and how she looked on their wedding day. In his confession with law enforcement, he acknowledged that she was a good person who took care of people, but any sort of attachment he had to her feels shallow. When he talks about Nikki, he actually says nothing about her personality. What he does is highlight how she makes him feel. He felt that she treated him with respect, but that was again about whatever need these women were filling for him. It wasn't about who they were. Deep down, he knew that not only was he unworthy, but someone would eventually discover who he really was, and he was the opposite of how he portrayed himself to the world. We know he felt unworthy as he admitted that he felt beneath Shanann and that she was smarter than him. He resented her for that. Initially, he was thrilled that Shanann, who was beautiful, smart, and ambitious, would choose him. It made him feel important. But then he just became threatened by her. her. Because Chris was so emotionally stunted and immature, any type of positive attention that made him feel exceptional would hook him. Nikki's interest surprised him because he hadn't received that kind of attention before from women. He thrived on praise, attention, and feeling special. So when Nikki wanted sex from him all the time and seemed interested in what he had to say, he thought that whatever stirred up inside of him could be love for the first time. And he would have done the same thing with her that he did with Shanann. He was capable of hiding his disorder until he had lulled her into a sense of comfort. Shanann said she protected him from and stood up to his mother, and this is the thanks he gave her. But Nikolai may have rivaled him with her own disorder, psycho-bitch. This is usually an affliction of the female gender, or a male with delicate womanly qualities. Symptoms include drastic mood swings, irrationality, needing to be talked down off a ledge, shouting expletives, bouts of jealousy, and are wild in bed and like to experiment. Quote, couples may eventually begin to bicker, annoy each other, and, unfortunately, sometimes that turns into bitter resentment. Nikki and Chris were in the peak of the honeymoon phase. In that phase, the person you're with can do no wrong, so it was completely unwarranted of Chris to compare the two relationships, end quote. And thank God, this is where the chapter ends. Talk about the fucking never-ending story. I seriously went checking a couple of times just to make sure that it was going to end, that it wasn't some kind of joke, that I went on to the next chapter without realizing. I need a damn intermission, man. And that will be the end of this video. I'm so glad I don't have to act socially acceptable around y'all. I'll pick up with chapter 21 in the next video. Much love and peace. Thank you for listening.